I still remember the sound of their laughter echoing through that dining room. Sharp, cruel, and unforgettable. It wasn't just laughter, it was mockery. Mockery directed at me, a 67-year-old widow who had worked her entire life, only to be reminded how small my pension looked next to their shiny cars and designer handbags. That day, I realized something. Sometimes the people who share your dinner table are the first ones to make you feel like you don't belong there. My name is Eleanor Pierce, and I've lived in Portland, Oregon all my life. I retired 3 years ago after spending over 4 decades as a public school librarian. Books were my escape, my world, but after my husband, Richard, passed away, my life started feeling painfully quiet. We had one son, Mark, who married a woman named Vanessa about 10 years ago. Vanessa was, well, let's just say she liked the finer things in life. High-end furniture, weekend getaways, social media parties. And when they moved into a big suburban house outside the city, one with a mortgage that seemed to breathe fire, I quietly hoped they could handle it. I didn't interfere. Until one day I became the topic of their jokes. It was a Sunday dinner at their home, something Vanessa insisted on hosting every few weeks. She'd make it sound like a family tradition, but deep down, I knew it was her way of showing off her new appliances or imported tableware. That evening, as we sat around her marble-top dining table, Vanessa started the conversation. So, Eleanor, Mark was just saying your pension finally started coming through, right? Must be exciting. Her tone was syrupy, but her smile, sharp as a knife. Yes, I said gently, just a little over $1,200 a month after taxes. Enough for my needs. She burst into a laugh that felt like someone had slammed the air out of my chest. $1,200? Oh, that's like grocery money for us, she said, glancing at her friend sitting across. Even Mark chuckled awkwardly. Mom, she's just joking. But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a wound, one she kept pressing with her manicured fingers. Then she added, you know, Eleanor, maybe you should have invested better instead of saving every penny. But I guess that's a generational thing. My throat tightened. My fork paused midair. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't taste the food on my plate. That night, back in my small apartment, the one I'd rented after selling our family home, I sat beside Richard's old photograph. He would have been furious if he'd seen how his son allowed his wife to humiliate me like that. I whispered to his picture. They think I'm weak, Richard. They think my worth ended when my salary did. It's strange how one cruel evening can rewrite your sense of dignity. For weeks, I avoided their calls. I found excuses not to visit. But then, guilt started to creep in. Mark was my only son, and despite Vanessa's cruelty, I didn't want to lose him too. One day, Mark came over alone. He looked worried, lines etched across his forehead. Mom, he said, we're in a bit of a situation. The mortgage's gotten heavier. Vanessa's business slowed down. We might need to refinance. I listened silently, my fingers tracing the rim of my teacup. It wasn't the first time they'd faced money trouble. Vanessa's spending habits were no secret. But as he spoke, I noticed something. There was fear in his eyes. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was desperate. That's when something inside me shifted. For the first time since that humiliating dinner, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. That night, as I stared at my jewelry box, I realized something that both hurt and healed at the same time. All those pieces weren't just gold and diamonds. They were memories of a woman who once believed she'd grow old surrounded by love and respect. But the woman who sat there that night, staring at the tiny sparkles under a weak lamp, she was no longer naive. She was ready to reclaim her dignity. The next morning, I drove downtown to a small jewelry appraisal store, the kind that still had handwritten receipts and polite old men behind the counter. The owner, Mr. Jacobs, had known me for years. He looked at my small velvet pouch and sighed softly. These are lovely pieces, Eleanor. You sure about this? I nodded, more sure than I've ever been. He weighed each item carefully, the engagement ring, the bangle, the pendant. By the end, he looked up and said, I can get you close to $38,000, give or take a bit. For a moment, I just breathed. $38,000, it wasn't fortune money, but it was enough. Enough to rewrite a few power dynamics that had humiliated me for months. I didn't want revenge. Not in the way movies show it. What I wanted was peace, but peace that came with a reminder. I thought about the mortgage Mark had mentioned, about how the bank could seize their home if they missed another payment. And a small, almost mischievous idea started to take root. What if I paid off their loan? What if I used that money, my jewelry, my memories, to clear their debt? But here's the twist. The house would be paid off in my name. I wasn't going to shout it from rooftops. I wasn't going to make a scene. I would simply, quietly, rewrite the paper that decided who really held the roof above their heads. 2 days later, I met with a mortgage advisor named Lisa, a kind woman in her 40s with calm eyes. I told her everything, that I wanted to pay off my son's remaining mortgage, but under a condition. The deed would transfer under my ownership, with a clause allowing them to live there rent-free for as long as I wished. Lisa raised her eyebrows. That's unconventional, Mrs. Pierce. Are you sure? Completely, I said softly. It's not revenge. It's insurance for my heart. She smiled knowingly and began the paperwork. I spent the next few days signing forms, wiring the payment, and sealing documents. It felt surreal, like a quiet storm brewing behind the calm. When the final signature dried, Lisa looked at me and said, "Congratulations. You've just paid off a $180,000 balance." I smiled faintly.
No, y whispered.
I just paid off their arrogance. A week later, Mark invited me to dinner again, to thank me for the small loan, as he called it. He didn't know the whole story yet. Vanessa was in her usual high spirits, swirling her wine glass, her laughter cutting through the air. "So, Mom," she said, "I heard you helped us a little with the payments." That was sweet. I mean, not much, but every bit helps. I looked at her calmly, the same calm you feel before lightning strikes. "Yes, dear. Every bit does help," I replied. I stayed quiet most of the evening, watching them talk about future vacations and home renovations as if life had handed them a new blessing. Inside, I wondered how long until they realize whose name that blessing truly belonged to. That night, back home, I stood by the window, watching the Portland rain slide down the glass. I thought about Richard, how he'd probably be proud that I stood up for myself without cruelty. You see, dignity isn't about shouting louder than those who mock you. It's about reminding them, silently, that their laughter never defined your worth. And though I didn't know it then, that quiet decision was about to shake their world. Because in a few weeks, when the property documents arrived at their doorstep, they would see my name printed right there, bold and unshakable on the deed. And that's when the real storm would begin. It was a gray Monday morning when the truth finally arrived, neatly folded inside a white envelope. Vanessa called me that afternoon, her voice shaking with disbelief and anger. "Eleanor," she said sharply, "we just got the deed papers. There must be some mistake." I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "What kind of mistake, dear?" "The kind where your name is listed as the owner of our house." Her tone trembled somewhere between outrage and fear. I stayed silent for a moment before answering, calm and steady. "There's no mistake, Vanessa. I paid off your mortgage in full. The house is now mine. You and Mark can continue living there, of course. I would never throw you out." For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence, the kind of silence that screams louder than words. Then she whispered, You planned this?" I exhaled softly.
No, Vanessa.
I didn't plan it. I decided it. That evening, Mark came storming into my apartment. His face was red, his eyes full of confusion and hurt. "Mom, what did you do?" he demanded. "I paid off your debt, Mark," I said gently. "You came to me asking for help. You didn't specify how I should help. I simply made sure the bank wouldn't take your home." "But in your name," he snapped. "You made us look like fools." I took a deep breath.
No, son.
"You did that when you laughed at your mother's pension." His expression softened for a moment, just a flicker, but Vanessa's words from behind him cut through the room. "This is manipulation, Eleanor. You wanted control. You wanted to humiliate us after that dinner. I turned to face her fully. Vanessa, I said, voice low but firm, humiliation doesn't come from what people do to you. It comes from how you treat others. I gave you a gift, but you saw only a threat, because your pride can't handle the fact that the woman with a small pension is the one who saved your roof. Her lips parted, but no words came. Mark sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. Mom, you should have told me. You blindsided us. I wanted you to learn, I said quietly. Not through lectures, but through life. You and Vanessa built your home on appearances, not stability. I just made sure it wouldn't collapse. He didn't look up. Vanessa's been crying all day, he muttered. She should be reflecting, I replied. Because laughter has a way of echoing back when it comes from cruelty. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't warm. It was wide and unfamiliar, like two people standing on opposite sides of a broken bridge. News travels fast in small neighborhoods. By the weekend, Vanessa's friends knew. Some admired what I'd done. Others whispered that I was vindictive. But I didn't care. For years, I'd been the quiet woman sitting at the corner of family dinners, invisible, polite, never answering back. Now they saw me differently. I wasn't angry. I wasn't loud. I was simply unshakable. I kept living my life as usual, morning walks, volunteering at the library, baking on Sundays. And slowly, I noticed something change. Mark started calling again, not for help, but for conversation. His tone softened. Vanessa, however, kept her distance. Pride doesn't dissolve overnight. A month later, Mark invited me over. The house looked the same, but quieter, humbler. He handed me a mug of tea and said, Mom, I know Vanessa's still upset, but I get it now what you did. I smiled gently. Do you? He nodded. You wanted to protect us, even from ourselves. I placed my hand over his. You're my son, Mark. I'll always protect you, but I also needed to protect my dignity. I spent my whole life giving quietly. This time, I gave loudly, without saying a word. Tears welled up in his eyes. You didn't deserve how she talked to you that night. No one deserves to be belittled, I said softly. Not even by family. As I drove home that evening, I looked at the reflection of the streetlights on my windshield and thought, I didn't just pay off a mortgage. I paid off the debt of my silence. But I had no idea. Something far bigger was still waiting ahead, something that would test my forgiveness and redefine what family really meant. It had been 3 peaceful months since the confrontation. Peaceful, but distant. Mark called sometimes, Vanessa never did. I didn't expect her to. Pride takes time to heal, and some people guard it tighter than love. Then one evening in late autumn, my phone rang. It was Mark, his voice trembling. Mom, it's Vanessa. She's in the hospital. My heart skipped. What happened?
Car accident.
She's stable, but she broke her leg badly. Surgery tonight. Without a second thought, I grabbed my coat and keys. When I arrived at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, Mark was pacing outside the waiting area. His face was pale. He looked like a boy again, scared, helpless. They said she'll be okay, he murmured, but she'll need months of recovery. And with her business still struggling? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already knew what he meant. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Mark, focus on her recovery. The rest will work itself out. He looked at me, guilt swimming in his eyes. After everything we said to you, after how she treated you, and you still came running. I smiled faintly. When someone's hurt, you don't count memories. You just show up. 2 days later, I stepped quietly into Vanessa's hospital room. She was awake, pale and tired. The sight of me caught her off guard. Eleanor, she whispered, her voice small, almost childlike. I nodded gently. I brought you some soup. Hospital food isn't exactly kind to the soul. She looked at me for a long time before tears filled her eyes. Why are you here? After everything? I sat down beside her. Because anger doesn't heal broken bones or hearts. She turned her face away, ashamed. I said terrible things to you. I laughed at you. Yes, I said softly. You did. A tear slipped down her cheek. And you still helped us. You still saved our home. I smiled, not proudly, but peacefully. Because I wasn't helping you, Vanessa. I was helping my son. And maybe I was helping the version of you who didn't know better yet. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. Just quiet sobs, the kind that come from finally seeing yourself. After Vanessa's surgery, I began visiting regularly, bringing homemade meals, helping her with physical therapy, even sitting by her side during long afternoons. One day, as I adjusted her pillow, she said softly, Eleanor, you remind me of my mother. She passed when I was young. Maybe that's why I never learned how to be gentle. Her confession pierced through me. All those months of resentment melted a little. I placed a hand over hers. Then maybe this is our second chance, to be gentler with each other. Her eyes glistened. I'd like that. Weeks passed, and slowly, Vanessa began to heal. Mark often thanked me, but I could see something different in his eyes now. Respect. Not out of guilt, but out of realization. One evening, he said, Mom, I know we can't undo what happened, but we've learned something. Pride doesn't build homes. People do. I smiled. You're learning what life teaches all of us, Mark. Too late, but just in time. Before Vanessa was discharged, her doctor told her she'd need at least 6 months before she could fully work again. She looked anxious, so I spoke gently. Don't worry about the house. I've decided something. She looked up confused. I'm transferring the ownership back to you and Mark, I said. You've learned your lesson and I've made my point. It's time to let go. Tears welled in her eyes. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. Say nothing, I said with a soft smile. Just promise me one thing. Never measure someone's worth by the number on a check. Respect doesn't come from money. It comes from gratitude. As I left the hospital that night, the air outside felt crisp and light. For months, I'd carried the weight of pain, of proving myself, of silent battles. But now, I realized something far greater. Sometimes, the strongest revenge is forgiveness. Because when you forgive, you stop fighting to be seen and start living to be free. It's strange how time can turn pain into peace if you let it. Months passed after Vanessa's recovery, and the tension that once filled the air around us slowly began to fade. The house that had once been a battleground of pride now sounded different. Laughter again, but softer this time, warmer. Sometimes I'd visit on weekends. Vanessa would cook, simple meals, nothing fancy, and Mark would tell stories about work or the neighbors. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for a woman my age, authenticity is worth more than diamonds. One crisp spring morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise over Portland's quiet skyline. The same city that once held my tears now held my peace. I thought about the path that brought me here, from humiliation to redemption, and realized that every sharp word, every lonely night, had carved out a deeper strength inside me. Life doesn't always give you fairness, but it does give you choice. The choice to stay silent, or to stand up. The choice to hurt back, or to heal forward. And that day, sitting on that porch, I knew I had chosen right. A few weeks later, Vanessa showed up at my apartment alone. She looked nervous but genuine. I hope I'm not intruding, she said softly. Of course not, I smiled. Come in. She handed me a small box, wrapped carefully with a ribbon. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. It's not much, she said, but it's from me. To thank you, not just for what you did, but for what you taught me. I ran my fingers over the cool metal. It's beautiful, I said quietly. She looked down, her voice trembling. I used to think money made you powerful, but I see it now. You never needed more money to have more strength. You already had it, in your grace. I reached out and hugged her, really hugged her, for the first time since she married my son. It wasn't forgiveness anymore. It was connection. A month later, Mark invited me for a small family gathering. When I arrived, I noticed something new. The wall where Vanessa used to display her luxury photos now held family pictures. One caught my eye. It was from years ago, when Richard and I were younger, standing in front of our first home. Vanessa noticed me looking. "Mark found that photo in your old album," she said. "We framed it because this house, it started with you too, with love that never asked for anything in return." For the first time in years, I felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from pride. As we sat down to eat, Vanessa raised her glass and said, "To Eleanor, the woman who taught us what real wealth looks like." I smiled through tears. "Real wealth," I said softly, "isn't in what we own. It's in what we give, even when it costs us something." That night, as I drove back home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. I thought of Richard again, how he'd always told me, "Ellie, the world measures success in dollars, but God measures it in grace."
He was right.
I didn't have a big pension. I didn't have riches or fame. But I had something far rarer. The ability to rise above cruelty, to love without pride, and to stand tall in my own quiet strength. Sometimes, when life laughs at you, you don't need to laugh back. You just need to live better. Because in the end, kindness is the only investment that never loses its value. People may forget what you bought for them, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. I learned that respect isn't demanded. It's earned through patience, through silence, and through strength that doesn't need to shout. My name is Eleanor Pierce, and this was the story of how I turned humiliation into honor and pain into peace. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming unshakably kind.